I understood she was the love of my life the moment her laughter echoed through the sterile air of that tiny cafe. The shock of that realization was visceral, a sudden, blinding flash that momentarily stole my breath. It wasn't a gentle awakening. It was a violent collision, shattering the carefully constructed emotional vacuum I had inhabited for half a decade. My heart, a muscle I had deliberately taught to beat with the minimum necessary effort, suddenly hammered against my ribs with a panicked, frantic insistence. No, no, not this. A voice screamed in the quiet recesses of my mind, cold and terrified, but the sound of her joy was already drowning it out. My world, which I had perfected into shades of safe, predictable grey, had just been assaulted by a vibrant, terrifying primary color. I felt exposed, stripped down to raw nerves in the middle of a mundane Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, and the sensation was unbearable, yet intoxicating. I hadn't come to that cafe, or any place for that matter, looking for anything beyond the bare minimum required for existence. For 5 long years I had been an expert in subtraction, subtracting emotion, subtracting attachment, subtracting future plans. I was a man living on geological time, committed to stability and silence. My life was defined by the massive, gaping void left behind when Clara died. She was gone 5 years ago, taken by a sudden, brutal illness that ripped her away from me in the span of 3 agonizing months. I hadn't just lost a fiancé, I had lost my anchor, my future, and crucially, my belief in stability. I learned the hardest lesson possible, that the things you love most are exactly the things that can be snatched away without warning, leaving you broken and responsible for the pieces. To survive that grief, I had built an intricate emotional fortress, brick by brick, mortared with fear and sealed with indifference. I worked as a freelance architect, a profession that allowed me to deal with structures and lines, avoiding the messy, unpredictable curves of human connection. I specialized in building things that wouldn't crumble, ensuring that my personal life remained a minimalist, isolated shell, safe, predictable, and utterly barren. Then there was her. I was staring blankly at my laptop screen, pretending to review blueprints, a shield against the world, when the energy shift occurred. It wasn't a visual stimulus that caught me first, but a disruption in the physical laws governing my immediate space. Her presence was like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. The air thickened, the background noise seemed to mute, and all sensory input funneled into a single overwhelming focus. When I finally lifted my eyes, reluctantly giving in to the magnetic pull, I didn't see details. I didn't register the color of her sweater or the style of her hair. I registered light. She was standing near the pickup counter, animatedly talking to the barista, and the sheer, unbridled vitality she radiated was a physical blow. It was the antithesis of my existence. For a man who had dedicated half a decade to surviving the dark, she was a supernova, and the light felt both terrifyingly warm and desperately needed. She tilted her head back slightly as she reacted to something the barista said, and that's when the sound hit me, that clear, resonant, utterly genuine laughter that had delivered the hook straight into my chest. When she turned away from the counter, she searched for a table, her gaze sweeping across the room until it locked directly onto mine. It was an accident of proximity, nothing more, but in that millisecond the world stopped moving. Her eyes, wide and intelligent, held a surprising depth, a quiet wisdom that belied the joyful noise she had just made. There was no flirtation, no invitation, just recognition, the sense that something vital had just happened between 2 separate entities, completely independent of their will. I felt my careful mask crumble, and I must have looked like a startled deer caught in headlights because a slight, apologetic smile touched the corner of her lips, a silent acknowledgement of the intensity of the moment. "I'm sorry," she murmured, approaching my table carefully, clutching a heavily dog-eared paperback and a steaming cup. "All the other spots are taken. Would you mind sharing this 4-seater? My throat felt dry, unused to constructing polite, spontaneous dialogue. No, not at all," I managed, sounding rusty and awkward. I immediately began gathering my laptop and papers, creating a deliberate physical space between us. I needed distance. I needed to rebuild the wall she had just breached. She slid into the seat opposite me, carefully setting down her things. "Thank you." "I'm Olivia," she said, extending a hand over the polished wood surface. Her touch was brief, warm, and startlingly grounding. "Ethan," I replied, taking her hand. And just like that, the barrier was down again. We started with the mundane, the quality of the coffee, the book she was reading, a dense history text, not a light romance, the impossibility of finding decent parking near Pike Place. But the ease of the conversation was anything but mundane. It was as if we were speaking a dialect only two people understood, a rhythm that had been established years ago and only now picked up again. I found myself telling her about the structural challenges of a recent project, something I usually reserved for my extremely patient assistant, and she listened, not with polite tolerance but with genuine curiosity, asking questions that showed she was truly tracking the complex geometry. "You speak about architecture like it's a form of therapy," she observed, her head resting on her hand, her expression thoughtful. I paused, realizing the truth in her statement. It is. Structure, permanence, control. That's all I've needed for a long time. I didn't elaborate, didn't mention Clara, but the gravity of my tone must have carried the weight of my past. Olivia didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "I get that. I specialize in restoring antique furniture. It's the same impulse, really. Taking something broken, honoring its history, and making it functional again. But you can't make it new. You can only make it strong enough to handle the next chapter." That was the click, the immediate, terrifying understanding that she didn't just understand my impulse, she lived it. She wasn't promising to erase the past, only to help fortify the future. We talked for 2 hours that day. Not about dating, not about romance, but about the scars we carried and the strange impulse to keep walking despite them. By the time she had to leave, promising vaguely to run into me again, the sterile air of the cafe felt charged, alive, like the moment before a massive thunderstorm breaks. We ran into each other again, of course. Seattle is too small when fate intervenes. The accidental meetings quickly became deliberate. A text message arranging coffee, a late-night call about a shared interest in classical jazz. The vulnerability deepened rapidly. I found myself confessing things to Olivia that I had never even admitted to my therapist. The crushing guilt over the things I should have done for Clara, the fear that I was incapable of genuine happiness, the sheer exhaustion of always being vigilant against pain. She responded by sharing her own secret struggles, the stifled dream of becoming a writer, the pressure she felt to maintain the family business, the quiet loneliness that permeated her late 20s. We laughed over truly terrible jokes and shared the heavy silences that felt more intimate than any hurried declaration. The physical chemistry was a constant, low-frequency hum beneath every word, every shared glance, growing stronger, more insistent, but we both seemed to respect the necessity of establishing the emotional infrastructure first. We were building something complex, and rushing the foundation would only lead to collapse. But the closer we got to cementing that foundation, the more acute my panic became. One Saturday night we were walking through Volunteer Park, the city lights shimmering through the wet foliage. Olivia stopped to point out a star configuration, and in the soft glow of the lamplight, her profile reminded me achingly of Clara. It wasn't a physical resemblance, but the sheer, blinding potential for future joy and future devastation. The memory of sitting bedside in the hospital, holding Clara's cooling hand, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted and the air turned thin. "You can't do this again, Ethan. You will lose her. And this time, it will kill you." I pulled back abruptly, my hand dropping from hers as if burned. I need to go," I stammered, the words forced out through a constricted throat. Olivia turned, her expression shifting from tenderness to concern. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied, backing away. I can't. This fair's moving too fast. I can't." The fear was a toxic flood, drowning every rational thought. My trauma had finally clawed its way back into the present, demanding allegiance. I spent the next 3 days in self-imposed exile, ignoring her calls, responding to texts with cold, clipped apologies about being overwhelmed with work. I was trying to shrink back into the safety of my shell, attempting to undo the last month of emotional progress, convinced that the only way to protect myself from the inevitable pain of loss was to initiate the loss myself. But Olivia didn't allow me the quiet retreat I craved. She showed up at my apartment building on Thursday evening, waiting for me near the lobby entrance. She wasn't angry. She looked tired, resolute, and utterly determined. "Don't you dare hide behind your blueprints, Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm as I approached, trying to sidle past her. "We talked about honesty. Don't throw away what we built because you're terrified of what might be." I finally stopped, turning to face her, the exhaustion of the last few days weighing me down. "You don't understand," I whispered, the dam finally beginning to crack. "I lost her, Clara, 5 years ago. I watched the most beautiful, vibrant person I have ever known simply stop existing. I swore I would never put myself or anyone else through that exposure again. Every time I look at you, I see the potential for that. Devastation, and it paralyzes me. I can't live through that second time. I can't survive you, Olivia." The confession hung heavy in the damp Seattle air. My secret, the cornerstone of my fortress, was finally exposed. Olivia stepped closer, her gaze unwavering, full of compassion but devoid of pity. "You're right. I can't understand losing your world that way, but I understand fear. And I understand the difference between grieving the past and punishing the future. Ethan, you aren't afraid of losing me. You're afraid of living while knowing that loss is possible. But that's the price of life. That's the cost of real love. It comes with the inherent risk of devastating pain." She reached out and gently placed her hands on my arms, grounding me. "I am not Clara. I won't replace her, and I won't erase the grief you carry. But I am here, right now, choosing to be vulnerable with a man who is actively trying to push me away. I'm choosing the risk of Hayu because the alternative, the silence, the solitude, that's the real death, isn't it?" Her words were a brutal, necessary awakening. She wasn't demanding a promise of forever. She was demanding a commitment to now. She didn't want the perfect, walled-off version of me. She wanted the messy, terrified, profoundly scarred architect standing before her. I swallowed hard, the fear still a dull ache in my gut, but for the first time in half a decade, I felt a stronger, opposing sensation, hope. I brought my hands up, covering hers. "I'm terrified, Olivia. Truly terrified." "Good," she replied, her eyes shining. "That means it matters. Choose the terror, Ethan. Choose me." I didn't need to think. I had already made the decision the moment her laughter filled that sterile cafe. But now I articulated the commitment, not as a breathless promise, but as a mature acceptance of reality. "I choose the risk," I confessed, pulling her into a tight, shaking embrace. "I choose this, I choose you. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I promise you today, and I promise you that I will stop using Clara's memory as a shield against the life she would have wanted me to live." A year later, we were sitting on a rickety old bench overlooking Puget Sound, the salt air carrying the distant cries of gulls. Our life wasn't a fairy tale. It was complex, layered, and occasionally challenging. There were days when the grief still surfaced, days when my anxiety flared, and Olivia would simply hold space for me without judgment or pressure, just presence. I was painting again, allowing color and chaos back onto the canvas after years of monochromatic self-denial. She didn't demand perfection. She demanded authenticity. I looked at her now, bundled up against the chill, her hand tucked securely in mine. She turned and smiled, a flash of that fierce, life-affirming joy that had initially broken through my defenses. I finally understood the profound gift she had given me. She hadn't arrived to fix my broken life. She had arrived to show me that I wasn't broken at all, merely dormant. She hadn't changed my life by filling the void left by loss. She taught me how to live again by proving that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the only doorway to true connection. She didn't change my life, she taught me how to live it, scars and all, one terrifying, beautiful, committed day at a time. We moved from the buzzing gallery floor to a quiet, dimly lit booth in a classic Seattle jazz club, the Triple Door maybe, or something equally steeped in history and shadow. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I felt genuinely present in a public space. For years I was a ghost watching life happen, but sitting across from Olivia, I was solid again, tethered by the sheer weight of her attention. She didn't rush the silence. She didn't fill the space with nervous chatter, a courtesy I found profoundly comforting. Instead, she simply looked at me, her eyes, a startling, warm hazel, absorbing the atmosphere, and then returning to mine, seeking connection without demanding performance. We talked about art, about the brutal honesty required to put your soul on canvas, and about the surprising comfort of the rain that was now drumming gently against the awning outside. It was all superficial, yet somehow it felt like the deepest conversation of my life. I found myself laughing, a sound that felt alien and unfamiliar in my own chest. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a full-bodied release of tension I hadn't known I was holding. She had a way of framing everyday absurdities that made the world seem less menacing, more whimsical. We were trading stories about disastrous first jobs, mine shelving books in a dusty university archive, hers waiting tables in a truly terrible diner. And I noticed that every time I spoke, she wasn't just waiting for her turn, she was listening, truly listening. There was a security in her presence that broke through the thick armor I had cultivated. It was the feeling of standing in a thunderstorm, knowing the roof won't leak. I felt the sharp, immediate click, a resonance deep in my core that confirmed, this is safe. It was terrifying because safety meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risking everything again. But the fear was distant, a dull background hum beneath the clear, strong note of her companionship. The small talk dissolved naturally, almost imperceptibly, as the second glass of wine went down. The jazz became smoother, the lights dimmer, and the weight of the past began to press forward, demanding recognition. I knew intuitively that to keep her, I couldn't keep the cage locked. "You look like you carry a lot of ghosts," she said, not as an accusation, but as a gentle, observational truth. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, utterly relaxed, inviting me into her confidence. I swallowed, the warmth of the wine suddenly cool in my throat. "I do," I admitted, the word catching. More than I realized until recently. I hadn't spoken Clara's name to anyone outside of my therapist in 3 years. It felt sacrilegious, like inviting a stranger into a sacred crypt. But with Olivia, the impulse to share was irresistible. I told her about the accident, about the sudden, brutal rupture that had severed my life into a before and an after. I spoke about the way I had packed away every piece of color and joy, convinced that happiness was a betrayal of my loyalty to Clara's memory. My voice was low and gravelly, the narrative raw and painful. I watched her face, bracing for pity, for the sudden shift in her eyes that would label me as damaged goods, too heavy to hold. But her expression remained steady, empathetic, and utterly devoid of judgment. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy with the unsaid weight of years. "That's a profound kind of pain, Ethan," she finally murmured, "and a profound kind of love." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, not squeezing, not demanding, just resting, a steady presence. I get the locking away. I do that too, just in different ways. She then shared her own burden, the crushing weight of familial expectation, the career she abandoned because it was what her parents wanted, not what she needed. She talked about the quiet, internal battle to define herself, outside of the labels others had given her. It wasn't death or trauma, but it was a deep, pervasive feeling of being trapped, a shared claustrophobia. It wasn't just connection, it was synergy. Our vulnerabilities fit together like two halves of a fractured whole. I felt the barrier around my heart, thick and cold for so long, begin to thaw, dripping away in the low light of that club. We talked until the waiters were stacking chairs, revealing fragments of our souls that we usually kept hidden even from ourselves. The chemistry wasn't just physical, it was intellectual, spiritual. It was the thrill of being seen, truly seen for the first time. The next few weeks were a dizzying ascent. We spent every possible moment together, navigating the rainy streets of Seattle, sharing late-night takeout, and talking for hours until the exhaustion of profound connection finally pulled us into silence. The fear, however, was merely dormant, waiting for the right catalyst. It happened on a crisp Saturday afternoon. We were in my apartment, the one I had spent years making sterile and impersonal, a monument to neutrality. Olivia was flipping through a box of old vinyl I hadn't touched since Clara died. It was a shared box, full of the mixed genre chaos that defined our early 20s. I watched, her a knot tightening in my stomach. She pulled out a record, The Great Escape by Blur, a silly, beloved favorite of Clara's. She smiled, dusting off the sleeve. "This is great," she said, her voice bright. "We should play this." The sound of the needle dropping, the familiar specific scratch before the music started, didn't bring nostalgia. It brought panic. It was the soundtrack to a life that had ended. And suddenly, seeing Olivia standing in my living room, humming along to their song, felt like the ultimate transgression. The guilt hit me, a suffocating physical wave. It wasn't about the music, it was about the replacement. My brain screamed, "You are happy, you are forgetting, you are moving on, and she is gone." I went cold. I needed space, distance, immediate retreat. "Turn it off," I heard myself say, the command sharp and ugly, slicing through the music. Olivia stopped humming instantly, her hand hovering over the turntable. She turned, her smile dissolving into confusion and then hurt. "Ethan, what is it?" "Just turn it off," I repeated, walking toward the window, turning my back to the room, to her, to the music, to the past, and most terrifyingly, to the present. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced I was making a terrible mistake, that this joy was ephemeral and dangerous. "I can't do this right now. I can't. I need a minute." The silence that followed was heavy and final. I knew I had built the wall again, higher and faster than ever before. I hadn't meant to hurt her, but my trauma had seized the controls, driven by the irrational, crippling fear that if I allowed myself to fully love Olivia, I would somehow erase Clara, and then inevitably I would lose Olivia too. I stood by the glass, staring out at the grey Seattle sky, waiting for the inevitable sound of the door closing behind the woman I was terrified to lose, because I was even more terrified to keep her. It wasn't just the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, or the low, gravelly tone of her voice that instantly appealed to my weary soul. It was the moment we sat across from each other at that crowded coffee shop, the daily grind, wasn't it? And she talked about her work as a museum curator. She wasn't just passionate about art, she was passionate about context, about the unseen stories behind the canvas. I remember thinking, she sees the hidden layers, just like I do. That first connection wasn't a spark. It was the quiet, terrifying realization that the heavy armor I'd worn for 3 years had suddenly become too loose, threatening to fall off completely. We talked for 4 hours, two strangers in Seattle, navigating everything from the precise difference between melancholy and true sadness to the absolute necessity of ordering extra whipped cream on hot chocolate, even if you were a grown man. There were no awkward silences, only breathable pauses where I felt my system recalibrate, recognizing a frequency I thought had been permanently tuned out. With Olivia, I didn't have to perform grief. I didn't have to explain my shadows. She simply existed beside them, offering light without demanding the darkness disappear. That security, that immediate permission to just be, was the first step toward the edge of the cliff. The connection deepened rapidly, fueled by late-night phone calls that turned into early morning goodbyes. We moved past safe topics and started handling the raw edges. Olivia confessed her crippling fear of failure, rooted in a difficult relationship with her hypercritical father. I, in turn, found myself talking about the silence of my apartment, how I used to leave the TV on just for the noise, and how I often drove miles out of the city just to feel anonymous. These weren't grand confessions, but they were the small, heavy stones we had carried alone. Sharing them felt like lightening the load, an intimacy far greater than any physical touch. We developed our own language, a wry glance across a crowded restaurant that meant, "Are we sure we belong here?" and shared secrets about our families that only the two of us knew. I remember the night we were sitting on my balcony, overlooking the Puget Sound, the air crisp and smelling of salt and rain. She was tracing the condensation on her glass. "What's your greatest fear, Ethan?" she'd asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I didn't mention Clara. I mentioned the fear of stagnation, the terror of becoming a ghost in my own life. That was a half-truth, but it was the most honest I'd been in years. And she understood. She didn't press. She just leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like a romantic advance and more like a mutual promise of shelter. We were building something fragile and necessary, a bunker against the cold world. Every shared laugh, every late-night philosophical debate was a brick laid perfectly. I started to believe, truly believe, that joy wasn't a betrayal, but a necessity. That was the foundation that crumbled the instant the needle hit the track earlier tonight. The joy, the easy rhythm of our lives, the sight of Olivia swaying slightly in my living room, humming along to their song, felt like the ultimate transgression. The guilt hit me, a suffocating physical wave. It wasn't about the music, it was about the replacement. My brain screamed, "You are happy, you are forgetting, you are moving on, and she is gone." I went cold. I needed space, distance, immediate retreat. "Turn it off," I heard myself say, the command sharp and ugly, slicing through the music. Olivia stopped humming instantly, her hand hovering over the turntable. She turned, her smile dissolving into confusion and then hurt. "Ethan, what is it?" "Just turn it off," I repeated, walking toward the window, turning my back to the room, to her, to the music, to the past, and most terrifyingly, to the present. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced I was making a terrible mistake, that this joy was ephemeral and dangerous. "I can't do this right now, I can't, I need a minute." The silence that followed was heavy and final. I knew I had built the wall again, higher and faster than ever before. I hadn't meant to hurt her, but my trauma had seized the controls, driven by the irrational, crippling fear that if I allowed myself to fully love Olivia, I would somehow erase Clara, and then, inevitably, I would lose Olivia too. I stood by the glass, staring out at the grey Seattle sky, waiting for the inevitable sound of the door closing behind the woman I was terrified to lose, because I was even more terrified to keep her. Every nerve ending screamed at me, to turn around, to apologize, to explain the ghost standing between us, but the words were trapped beneath the weight of years of unspoken grief. I was frozen by the cruel logic of the survivor. Pain was safety. Joy was vulnerability. And vulnerability meant I was setting myself up for the kind of catastrophic loss that had nearly ended me the first time. The silence stretched, becoming brittle and sharp. I could feel her presence behind me, the specific stillness of a person who is deeply wounded but trying desperately to understand. I clenched my jaw so tight my teeth ached. "Don't move, don't look. She has to leave. It's better this way." It was the coward's decision, choosing self-preservation over the terrifying, vibrant future she represented. I was choosing the familiar hell of solitude over the unpredictable heaven of loving Olivia. The silence was the sound of my life shattering again. But this time, I was the one holding the hammer. The silence was the sound of my life shattering again, but this time I was the one holding the hammer. I stood rigid, waiting for the fatal click of the door handle, the final decisive sound of her retreat. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was the right, logical, miserable choice. Pain was known, joy was chaos, but the sound didn't come. Instead, a voice, low and steady and infinitely sad, pierced the thick, suffocating air. "You think you're protecting me, James?" I flinched, a spasm running down my spine. Her voice wasn't accusatory, it was merely stating a profoundly painful fact, and that observation hurt far worse than any rage. I kept my back to her, unable to break the paralysis. Turning around meant admitting I was wrong, meant subjecting myself to the terrifying sight of her wounded eyes. "You think," she continued, her voice taking a slight, trembling edge, "if you push me away now, you save us both the agony of what might come later. You're trying to pre-grieve, aren't you? Trying to control the future loss by initiating the pain now." She had walked closer, not aggressively, but just into the intimate radius of my despair. I could feel the heat radiating off her skin, the specific, comforting scent of her perfume. "But I'm already here, James. I already see you. You're not saving me from pain. You're robbing me of choice." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the searing clarity of her truth. How could she understand the cruel logic of the survivor so perfectly? "Whatever happened," Olivia insisted, her tone hardening slightly, "whatever devastation you survived, I honor that. I respect the grief that defines your past. But I am not your past. I am not a replay. And I deserve the chance to decide if I'm willing to stand beside you, knowing the risks, knowing the stakes." My carefully constructed walls were cracking, the mortar dissolving under the corrosive acid of her sincerity. I couldn't bear the back of my head being the final image she took away. I couldn't let my cowardice define our ending. The iron band around my muscles snapped. I pivoted slowly, feeling the heavy shift of my entire world. I faced her, and the sight was devastating. Her eyes, usually sparkling with an intense, vibrant intelligence, were shadowed by the deep pain I had inflicted. "I can't risk losing you, Olivia," I finally managed, the words scraping, my throat raw. "I barely survived the last time. I can't go back to that void." The ghost, the unnamed trauma of losing Sarah 6 years ago in that pile-up on the Long Island Expressway, finally had a voice. The fear was real, physical, and suffocating. I told her everything then, the endless winter of grief, the 4 years I spent building walls brick by agonizing brick in my tiny apartment overlooking Central Park, the self-destructive safety I found in solitude. I didn't minimize the cost of my past. I laid the wreckage bare. When I finished, the air was silent again, but this time the silence was shared, intimate, heavy with confession instead of avoidance. Olivia stepped forward, her movement deliberate and gentle. She placed her hands softly on my shoulders, tilting her head back to meet my gaze. "I know it's terrifying, James. I see the terror in your eyes right now. But if we only choose what is safe, we never choose what is true." She didn't offer empty platitudes or claim she could miraculously heal me. She offered something infinitely more valuable: partnership. "I won't pretend the ghost isn't there," she said, her thumb stroking my collarbone. "He's part of the landscape now. He built the foundation of the man I met. But I promise you this, I will never be the reason you regret choosing life. I will never ask you to erase what you lost. I just need you to look at me, right now, and choose what is here, present and real." That was the declaration I needed. It wasn't a demand for perfection. It was an invitation to authenticity. It was permission to be human, damaged, and yet still worthy of joy. I grabbed her hands, pulling them down to my chest, feeling the frantic, desperate rhythm of my own heart against her palms. "I choose you, Olivia," I said, the gravity of the statement settling deep in my bones. It was the heaviest promise I had ever made. "I choose the terror of loving you. I choose the risk because the alternative, a life without the possibility of you, is the true, inescapable void." It was the decision to start dismantling the fortress, stone by agonizing stone, knowing the vulnerability inherent in standing exposed. The fortress didn't crumble overnight. There were nights, even months later, when the old fear would claw at the edges of my sanity. A delayed text message, an unexpected work trip to San Francisco, and the icy, familiar panic would return. But now I didn't retreat. I turned to her. We built our world not on forgetting the past, but on integrating it, acknowledging the terrible fragility of human happiness while fiercely defending its existence. We eventually left the pressurized intensity of the city, finding a small sun-drenched house overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Santa Monica, a place where the wide-open expanse felt less like a threat and more like endless possibility. I learned that love isn't about eliminating fear. It's about finding something worth risking the fear for. Olivia didn't try to change the architecture of my soul. She didn't seek to heal the old wounds or replace the memory of Sarah. Instead, she taught me that pain, while an inevitable part of the human condition does not have to be a permanent resident. She showed me that joy isn't a betrayal of grief. It's the ultimate, profound homage to the preciousness of life. I often think back to that silent, agonizing moment when I had my back turned to her, convinced that solitude was the only way to survive. I was so wrong. Survival was a meager goal. Olivia didn't save my life. She didn't just modify my existence. She taught me how to actually live it. She was and remains the beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly necessary reason why I finally stopped existing in shadows and stepped into the light. The ghost is still there sometimes, a quiet memory standing in the corner, but now Olivia is the radiant light filling the center of the room. I finally understood. She wasn't the love of my life because she was perfect. She was the love of my life because she was the only one who dared me to be real.